Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world. This is part 2 of this episode. Be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't already. Link in the description.
This episode is brought to you by Founder Catalyst. If you're raising funds and you need to get yourself SCIS and EIS advanced assurance and you need some help with that, then stick around to find out how you can get 5% off of Founder Catalyst's services. Okay, we're back for part 2. If you haven't checked out part 1 of my chat here with Daniya, I strongly suggest that you do. Provide some context to what we're continuing to talk about, which came out a couple of days ago. So go and check that out, and you'll hear more of the origin story, I guess, of what we're talking about. But yeah, just so we're picking up where we left off, basically. So yeah, you got to the fundraising stage and you were sort of beginning to scale things up. Would that be a fair sort of assessment of where things were? Yeah, just talk me through kind of what was happening then at that point. So where did it go from there? You're sort of dripping through those. We will get into that a bit more as well about the pros and cons of maybe crowdfunding, because I'm sure you've got a lot of valuable lessons there to share. But so you crowdfunded as well as a little bit of an angel investment as well from your co-founder, dripping those funds into the business to scale and kind of move on. So what were the goals and what sort of happened from that point on?
Yeah. So I think a little bit we not fell into the trap, but kind of we had this, next point of fundraise in mind.
Right.
So we think the funds will last 18 months. How do we get to the next point of fundraise? So that was very much about how quickly can we grow the revenue to show growth and show that that the business is growing and meeting the targets that we kind of set out. In order to do that, we kind of had to get to a wider audience. We're an online e-commerce business. How do you get in front of more people? And at that point in time, it was Facebook ads, Instagram ads, Google ads. So that was kind of really where a lot of the focus went, was let's try and drive customers to the site. And until then, what we'd done is we'd done it, but on either a very low budget, very, very low to no budget, and on the basis of kind of, organic friends, family, social media, people finding us. So we sort of went into this, let's acquire customers as much as possible, because if we can acquire them, then we can keep them, then, that sort of second, third order starts to become profitable. So that was really the focus of it. And understanding how we could best do that. So what do you need to do to acquire customers? You need to make ads, you need to create videos, you need to tell them what the product is. Because I think that's where once we took the step outside of the people who proactively found us or found us through a recommendation, people then got to that sticking point of, what do you do? What's a meal kit? What do I receive? How do I cook it? Do I need to be a chef? All of these questions sort of suddenly popped up, and it's then about trying to, educate, if not the masses, the people who actually come to your site. So that's really where we kind of then started focusing the investment, was on what the communication is. How do we speak to people? How do we tell them, when you're not speaking to them in person and you're on your website, you're only shop front? How do you get across very quickly what it is you do? So one of the things that we invested in quite early on was PR. So we had a PR agency who worked for us, which I think was really valuable, over and above probably, spending money on paid ads. PR is a really valuable investment for early stage startups, but for a period of time, because, PR, what my experience was that the return on it was, it was sort of like, probably not your hockey stick return. It was it was the kind of the inverse. So you went up, you got massive return at the beginning, and then it sort of quickly petered down because you're not so new and exciting anymore. So, we got things like articles in the Times, in the Saturday Times about, posh pot noodles. We were featured in a lot of the big publications as best meal kits, or, because this was lockdown and people were looking for things to do. And then the other one that really triggered a massive interest was William Sitwell did an article in the Times about the death of a restaurant, and he didn't mention any other businesses apart from ours, and it was an opinion piece. So it was amazing, because I didn't really know it was happening. And then that day, the Shopify site just went bing, 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 and just, and by the way, all that happened there is I'd sent him an Instagram message saying, you tried someone else's meal kit. I've got a meal kit. Would you try mine? And I think he didn't come back to me for 2-3 months, and then came back and went, yeah, sure, send it to me. I sent it to him with no expectation, didn't know what would happen. So that wasn't even through a PR agency. Sent it to his home address. He got it after, I think he left it outside for a day or two, because it had a 4-day shelf life and it was January. So it was fridge cold. So it was fine. And then he ate it and he said he loved it. And ended up putting me into this article, which I knew nothing about, and just, our sales, I think, grew 3,000% in a day or something. So that was a really good. And what that does is, if you then have the PR, is you have then good, strong credentials of brand, of businesses that, like we had GQ, we had Good Housekeeping, we had BBC Good Food, and we could put those logos on the website and track people to where the page did sort of said, we've tried this, it's good. So it gave us some confidence from customers that we were real, that we were good, and that they could then hear somebody talking about how they had it and how they tried it, which really helped, kind of cross that barrier of how do you get across what you are, as an online business. So that was a lot of the focus of, the kind of post investments. How do we widen the market reach?
And presumably it sounds like that worked, and that was well underway then. So were there also, am I right in thinking when you first spoke, you mentioned about there was a push then to go into supermarkets as well?
Yeah, so we'd always, and this was going back to that very first conversation I had with Alex at Pastor Evangelist. He said to me, you need to be omnichannel. You can't just be D2C, and they've done that, haven't they? They do takeaway, they do, they're in supermarkets, and you can see that logically when you look at it. How often do you proactively go back to a website that you've been on to buy something without a prompt? And those prompts, those Facebook ads, those Instagram ads, those social media videos, they cost a lot of money. But if you're going to the supermarket and you're walking through the aisles and something's there, oh yeah, I've had that, I'll just grab it. So we'd always wanted to go into retail at some point. It's also, I understood it was costly, it was difficult. You needed to have a product that, was probably had a longer shelf life than 5 days. So it was on the roadmap, but it wasn't there. We hadn't done anything. And it wasn't until we went into Ray, the store, that Whole Foods went and did a tour of the store. And Nicole phoned and said, Whole Foods would like to meet you. I said, oh, okay, great. And this was sort of, flashbacks of this farmer's market. I haven't got a product for them. I don't know what I'm doing, but yeah, sure. I'll meet you. And so we sat down with a buyer from Whole Foods, and she said, we think Vietnamese food is on the rise. We don't have a Vietnamese brand. We would like to have a brand, and we really like your brand, and we'd love to work with you. I said, okay, great. Yeah, we'll do that. I said, okay, but we need, we'd like 5 to 7 SKUs. So 5 to 7 different products, because what I didn't understand at the time is that retailers are looking for, a number of products from one brand, because it, gives you enough shelf space, it increases the category value, so you're not just, buying one product from one brand is quite risky for them, especially the setup costs of adding a brand to the supermarket. And also, you're not going to take up much shelf space. So they want a range of products from you. And at the time we had 5 products, so that was sort of, possible. So we want 5 to 7 products, and they have to be ambient. And that was, ambient obviously means that they can sit on a shelf with no fridge. And at the time we had a 5-day shelf life, and we were not ambient. I said, oh, okay, yeah, sure, no problem. I'll do that for you. So, winging it again. So we went away from that meeting, and Andrew and I went for a coffee, went, oh God, what are we going to do now? So we said, right, we have to find somebody to make it ambient. So we've spoken to a few other people who knew bone broth or done broths. We found out their manufacturers, or they gave us, people who could speak to. One of my advisors at the time, my advisory board, he went to an event in Paris and met somebody from Estonia who was doing a bone broth, and he put us in touch. And so we flew out. We had a couple of different options, and we got samples and we tried them all. And we'd had 2 or 3 samples from different manufacturers, and I was just so underwhelmed by them. I thought, this is not very good. And these ones
like freeze-dried rehydration sort of thing?
No, it's liquid broth.
Oh, okay. It was, okay.
And these samples from Estonia came, and I was like, I left them, I think for 2 to 3 weeks. I didn't try them because I was I was worried that if I tried them and I didn't like them, I'd be back. We'd have nothing to go on because we hadn't found a manufacturer that we liked. And, it was really interesting because I kept on looking at it thinking I should really try that. And I was almost too scared to. And one day I sort of said, right, no, you've got to try it. You need to know if they're good. And I opened them all up, and they were just amazing. They were just I was like, this is, they're making a great product. And so we went out and we flew and saw them. And it was really fascinating because they were making their product in the exact same way I was making mine, except we had then sort of, I think there were 70, 80 litre pans. We were making you could fit one of my kids inside them. That's how big they were. But they were making them in 500 litre pans, and it was automated. There was a kind of a hose system going into filling the pouches. So they made it in exactly the same way, with the same care, the same sort of level of ingredients, just on a bigger scale. And, and they had all the right accreditations. And so it was really nice to find somebody who cared that much. Because for me, I'd always said, I'll do a retail product, but I'm not going to compromise on the quality or compromise on the, on the ingredients and the flavor, or add preservatives, just to get to this, this ambient product. To be on a supermarket shelf, it had to be the right quality of product. And they helped us find it. So Whole Foods approached us. And then a few months later, Selfridges approached us. And so I did pitch to Sainsbury's Future Brands at a bread and jam event, sort of about a year later. And they were really excited, really interested, but never got back to me. And that program's closed down now, so I think that was sort of partly why. But then, 6 or 12 months after launching in Selfridges, Nicole from Ray sent me an email and said, Harvey Nichols have been in touch, they're interested. I've showed them your brand, they're interested, so here's their number. Harvey Nichols kind of, also approached us, so we got onto their shelves. So I never had a meeting with any other buyers apart from the ones that we were with. That was partly what we wanted to do, was we wanted to get enough retail data to then go to an Ocado or a Waitrose and say, right, this is what we've done in Whole Foods. This is how successful it's been. This is where we've got to with our rate of sale. Now, I didn't want to go without that data, because I thought if we go without that data, you're kind of, you often, I don't think you only get one bite of the cherry, but it's hard, to keep knocking on doors without having a good reason to. But obviously the journey never took us to that point where we got in touch with them.
But you started stocking in Selfridges, though?
Selfridges first, because although Whole Foods approached us first, Selfridges, they then went through a restructure. They had a range review process, so we didn't make it until the next one after we had our product ready. But Selfridges moved really quickly. So we launched in Selfridges, then in Whole Foods, and then Harvey Nichols. And we also had some independents as well, and sort of local farm shops.
That's awesome. I mean, presumably there were other challenges to making the product ambient as well, beyond just the bone broth, right? Because you had fresh meat, shellfish, food, and yeah. So how did you solve that?
I didn't. As usual, I found an expert to solve that for me.
Right.
So the manufacturer of the broth, they'd been sort of looking at some ways of making it ambient themselves. And I think we became their sort of test case for it. So
right.
Again, I didn't want to add preservatives or anything to the product. Our broths were always, bones, spices, vegetables, fish sauce. That's the ingredients. And the ingredients of the fish sauce, I was very clear, it had to just be anchovy extract and water. It couldn't be, E this and E that and lots of other ingredients. So it's a super clean ingredient deck. And so they sort of said that this is a way we can make it ambient. We put it in the pouch, we hot fill it, and once it's in the pouch, sort of, pasteurize the pouch basically effectively for, right. I think it was 10 minutes. And that makes it ambient. It's a little bit of food voodoo science that I don't fully get, but it worked. And we got a 9-month shelf life from something that was 5 days to 9 months. And interestingly, when we did taste tests of the two products next to each other, again, it was my husband, my family, I said this, A and B, one was the non-ambient, one was the ambient version of the product that we made. They all preferred the ambient. And I think that was just because potentially the flavors got slightly enhanced.
Yeah, sat for longer. Yeah.
And so we were able to make the same great product and have it ambient. That was that was the dream.
So was it still a kit, or was it just the broth at this point then?
Then it was the broth. So Whole Foods wanted a kit at the beginning, but I think it became too expensive.
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
Well, and it's not really realistic. I mean, you can't have an ambient product. I mean, otherwise you're going to have freeze-dried or dehydrated noodles, right?
Yeah.
And you can't do that with like a good quality. You're not going to freeze-dry meat and prawn. Like it just wouldn't work.
No, I mean, it probably would have been everything but the fresh meat,
right?
Or the fresh herbs. But
yeah.
it just, when we looked at the costings of it, it just didn't make sense and value for the customer. The cost would need to be too high, because you're also talking about, packaging inside packaging. So when you look at meal kits, I don't know, the fajita ones, for example, you've got a big box. They're not cheap. Inside it, you've got something where your salsa is, something where your wraps are in, something where your spices are in. Works at a massive scale because they've got, they can get that very cheaply. But for small businesses to pay for a box and then 3 other bits of packaging, it's just so prohibitive.
I don't think they're that popular to buy as buying the things separately to some extent. Because when I shop, because I think I mentioned you before, I'm a bit of a foodie. I'm the chef at home. I was a trained chef back in the day. And when I look at that, those kits, I mean, they're usually not the right number of people, for the right number of people for me anyway. Right. So I look at it and go, well, we're going to want more than that. I don't want a tiny little sachet of salsa or a tiny little, I want to buy the big pot and I want to buy, you know what I mean? So that's kind of, I think it fits otherwise a very, very specific, like 2-meal sort of person thing, whereas most people would want a bit more control over that. So it makes sense. And just the packaging and then the waste as a result of that, the rubbish that's left over. It makes sense that you went down that route. I buy the Itsu broth. The ramen broth. That's quite nice. So I can kind of see the. Well, you're not a fan.
Not a fan of their ingredients.
Okay, I'll be honest. I haven't really paid much attention.
Itsu is a fantastic brand. It's a lot of yeast extract, salt and sugar used to make, which is why their price range is. My broths were selling for $6.99 for 500 ml. They've made a beef fur broth. They sell a litre for $3.99. So it's twice the size and half the price. You can't do that with great quality ingredients. So it's incredibly accessible. And I think that's fine, but it's not, it's not the product that I wanted to create.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Direct competitor. I didn't really think about that until you just mentioned it. But so how did it do once you launched? I mean, presumably, did it go well? Did it sell well?
Yeah. So I mean, they kept on reordering, which was great. Selfridges, I think they reordered after kind of like a week or two.
Oh, really? Wow.
They sold out really quickly, and then Whole Foods and Harvey Nichols both ordered again. They seemed really happy. Interestingly, Selfridges doesn't give you sales data, so you can't actually use any of that data to make like predictions. What you can only infer your sales data on the basis of how much and how often they order.
That's really not helpful at all, is it? It's
not really helpful. The good thing is they only have one store, so it's easier to make those assumptions. But Whole Foods, for example, would give you, the amount sold in this store this week of each product. So that was much more helpful, and that was the data we were trying to kind of build up. But they all seemed happy, and they ordered. I think they did my farmers market approach where they ordered a small amount, and then the next time they doubled the order. And they were the orders were growing and the amount was going. Let's in context, these retailers, while they're brilliant, they are the launch pad for the bigger retailers. This is where you start, your journey starts here, but they are still quite small. Whole Foods has 7, I think they might just opened another one, 8 stores. Selfridges is 1. Harvey Nichols has 6, which I didn't even realize until I launched in them. So they're not, you can't make massive amount of money just selling in these retailers. But they were the start of a case we were building to branch out into the next stage.
Yeah, fair enough. What are the sort of, you don't have to tell me, but what are the sort of profit margins on something like that? I mean, I'd imagine because, the production of it and getting it there and then of course them selling it directly to consumers, there's probably not an enormous amount left on the table when all is said and done.
No. So for your very best food and beverage business, the top brands in the world, I think their best profit margin is 8 to 10%.
Oh, really?
Wow. Net profit margin, yeah. So imagine for, brands that don't have massive buying power, don't have, huge sales numbers, that's going to go down and down. So I think what's really important for brands to do is to look at your gross profit margin, selling into retailers, and to understand what contributes to that. If you sell an ambient product into a Whole Foods, a Selfridges, Harvey Nichols, you have to sell through a wholesaler. So you don't go direct, and they want a margin. So your wholesaler wants probably 15 to 25%, and then your retailer wants a margin of 30 to 50%, let's say. So that's at the top end. That's like 75%, 70% margin they want on the retail price. So understanding what they are, really helps you understand if you've got a viable retail product, because you need to have a really good, strong gross profit margin to be able to swallow those margins that they want. I think potentially it gets easier when you're going to a Tesco's or a Sainsbury's and you're selling into them directly, because they have slightly lower margin expectations, and you're selling directly, so you don't have the same.
And huge volume.
But of course that comes with its own huge cash flow challenges, that I think were part of the reason why we closed, looking at that.
Well, let's get to that. So what happened there then?
It was, kind of a bit of a perfect storm, really, of things. 2020. So we closed August 2024, but we tried to fundraise in 2023, which is when the money was running out. So we did make it last, until mid 2024. In 2023, trying to raise again, it was just, I think I mentioned before, it was just impossible. Very few people were investing. There'd been some high-profile kind of crowdfunded or meal kit businesses that had fundraised before that had gone under, and the difficulty is in that environment, even if you're doing things better, even if like we were growing well, we didn't have huge costs, our margins had improved massively, we'd worked really hard on making this a more sustainable business, or getting to the point, when we closed the business, we were break even, we weren't losing money at that point in time. But even if you've got all of these fantastic elements to your business, with that sort of type of environment, and investors having sour taste in their mouth for some other investments that may not have been managed so well, or have gone under, lost people a lot of money, you get tarnished with the same brush. And so it was just even hard to get through doors, in 2023. And so my co-founder and I, we made a decision that we would stop spending money on any marketing. I think if we'd not seen the retail possibility in 2023, we would have gone, that's it, let's close the business. But because we saw the retail possibility, of a product that buyers were asking for, buyers were coming to us. We weren't going to them. Buyers were coming to us. We had a really solid margin to sell into retail. And, we could see that the interest in this space, in bone broth, in Vietnamese, was growing. And so we thought we had a, really good, viable retail product, which, we did. We said, right, let's focus on that. So we pulled back spend online. We still did the meal kits, but we did them, I think, 2 or 3 days a week rather than 5 or 6 days a week. We scaled back on all the staff, and we just, at one point it was, do I pay myself, or do I pay more like the lady who works in my kitchen? And otherwise I'd be doing it on my own. And I made a choice then. I said, right, well, I won't be paid. So I'd stop taking a salary, and I'll still pay more to work in the kitchen. So we got to the point where the meal kits were, say, break even, they weren't losing us money. So the growth, dropped off a cliff. But, in terms of, being a more sustainable business, it was a more sustainable business. And the retail side of it was growing. So the story was all panning out. The problem is that, come 2024, when we had, we'd run out of money then, it was, we either need more investment to keep this going. And frankly, I didn't want to put in more, because I was already not earning any money, and, kind of working an awful lot. And it was hard to go out for more investment at that point in time, because the very simple picture of a story was, we'd gone like that and then we went like that. Even though there was an explanation for it, it's not one that investors want to see.
And especially in that climate, like you said, it's just,
Yeah. So what we were planning to do was that to grow in retail, and eventually, operate a kind of a zero level, just sell the retail product, store it somewhere, have very minimal costs, and keep growing that way. And as and when, we might get into a bigger retailer, then use that as a kind of incentive to get more investment and take the growth forward. So that was working, with getting more orders. We were doubling our orders from our suppliers. Whole Foods especially were ordering more and more. But in August this year, we got a batch of a product from our manufacturer, and these were in our packaging that we'd invested in. So we'd invested in packaging, kind of suitable for us, because previously we'd been using theirs. And it arrived in the UK, and it just was not fit for purpose. There was sort of grease on the outside. The labels were all warped. It was really just something I said, I'm not sending that to anyone. It's not, it was just not fit for purpose. So we then had this point of, we've got no product. We've got orders, we've got no product. We need to go back to the drawing board with packaging and figure out what packaging could we use now. And if we go back to the drawing board with packaging, it's already taken us 3 months to get this packaging, and then to have the batch made and then sent over. Our Whole Foods, Harvey Nichols, Selfridges, they're all going to just wait and go, yeah, sure, just wait until you've got your next batch and then send it to us. We didn't know. And all of this would have taken an extra investment, so of which we had no cash. And it really got to the point, and Andrew was really fantastic at this, kind of predicting it forward. And he said, if we close now, we don't owe anybody anything. We would have paid off all of our debts. We even paid back customers who had outstanding gift cards. We contacted all of them and sent them, the money directly. And if we don't do it now, we're at risk of, getting into a situation where we're going to owe, suppliers money and eventually have to close as an insolvent business. And as directors, neither of us wanted to do that. We wanted to be able to operate properly and well, and know that we'd done everything we could, and it would have meant going into that next part with this element of risk of we're really winging it now and financially winging it and putting people in a situation that we possibly know that we're not going to survive, and we're going to kind of expose ourselves to that, and neither of us felt comfortable with that. So I still, I still have people ask me, my local farm shop say, have you got any more stock left? It sells really well. I still think we had a fantastic product, and, maybe we should have tried a bit harder to sort of sell the brand and sell the product to somebody else. We didn't even try at all, to be honest. We had a fantastic product. It was just too small, really, to, break in to be a challenger brand that small and break out against, the big boys, Itsus, everybody else. It would have taken massive more investment, and, and we didn't have that.
Yeah, and it's such a shame. With the packaging side of things, that was ultimately the straw that broke the camel's back by the sounds of it. But was that company not able to issue a refund for?
Yeah, no, they were brilliant.
But it was just the timing of just then going back to someone else.
Yeah, so we got a full refund on the batch. They didn't charge us for the product. They didn't charge us for the pouches. We got a refund on that. They were very honourable, good, good partners to work with. But it would have been a case of telling all the retailers, we don't have stock now. We will do at some point in the future, and we don't know when that exactly is, because we need to sort out this packaging. And again, that financial risk that would have exposed us to.
So you're not gone back to the original packaging you were using?
We could have done.
Raising investment is painful enough without getting bogged down in legal costs. That's why I'm using Founder Catalyst, today's sponsor for Peer, my startup's pre-seed raise. We've been lucky enough to have Sam, the CEO of Founder Catalyst, on the show before. Go and check out that episode. Their funding round service offers the most cost-effective way to produce funding round legals in the UK. It's just £1,495 excluding VAT, with no monthly fees or hidden extras, no matter how much you're raising. One Founder Catalyst customer recently raised 2.7 million and saved around £10,000 compared to the next option. If you're looking for SEIS, EIS Advanced Assurance, they've got a 100% success rate over the last 3 years. Founder Catalyst is built by founders for founders, and from my own experience, I can't recommend them enough. You can scan the QR code on the screen around here somewhere or around there somewhere, I don't know, or use the link in the description for 5% off. Thank you to Founder Catalyst for sponsoring this episode. Now back to it.
But it was never quite right. It was fine, but it was, we definitely could have done more. We definitely could have, persevered some more, worked a bit harder, put a bit
Well,
more
no,
money
look,
in.
I'm not trying to suggest
no,
that
no,
like
oh,
you guys didn't try
don't worry.
hard enough, but
No, I know you're not. No,
I'm just
I know
being
you're
curious.
not. It's just I know that we could have done slightly more. And there's always that niggling part of me that's like, should we have done it? But it was hard. It was really, really hard, and it was hard to the extent that it was impacting me personally. The idea of, okay, we're going to close down this unit that we have, and therefore we'll have 3,000 pouches of broth. Okay, where do we store them? Oh, we'll store them at my house. I just, it got to the point where I thought, we've got something, we've got a great product, we could have a great business, it could be something, but there's a small chance of that against a much bigger risk of it not. And it would be a continuous fight, a continuous, effort to,
but
always.
Isn't that just the inherent nature of entrepreneurialism anyway?
Yeah, absolutely. And some people would do that, and I think I wasn't the person that wanted to do that.
Do you feel like, would it be fair to say that your passion for it had dwindled by that point, maybe? And so your fire to sort of like to do this, it just maybe wasn't there in the same way as it was, maybe a year before or something, especially when you sort of then start encountering all these roadblocks.
Yeah, and I think we doing it alone is very hard. So whilst I had Andrew, and he was great, he was never really there doing it, like in the kitchen. Like the person who, in December 2023. I had to drive every day half an hour to the nearest DPD depot and drop off 50 boxes because every single day of the week, because they weren't collecting. And the only way to keep our business running was to drive with my car. Thankfully, with 3 kids, we have a family massive car. We could fit 50 boxes in the back. But I spend an hour and a half driving there and back. Sometimes with my kids in the car, sometimes not. And it got to the point then when, we lost, the last employee that we had, Maura, she had to go because we didn't have the money. So it was going to be me. I would be at home packing a box, if I was sending it out. I would be storing stuff at my house. And,
I could see. It must have felt quite demotivating.
Yeah. It was just that, why am I doing this? I'm doing it because I think the reasons for doing it suddenly became outweighed by the reality of doing it.
Right.
And and I was never massively motivated by, I want to make loads, I want to get to an exit and make loads of money. Money's never really massively motivated me in that. I just wanted to build something that I was really proud of, that I really enjoyed doing, and that I could, hold up and go, yeah, I've made this, and it's great. The same reason why, I wouldn't have like an Itsu, broth, their ingredients are much, are not meat, are not bones, they're different, so they can sell it at a much lower price point. So, if I'd wanted to make a product, just get it on the shelves, that's the kind of route that you could go down. But I had to have that, I wanted that kind of that integrity of product to stand up and go, no, I've made something really good, and it's made with really good ingredients, and you can eat it and it'll be really good for you. And I think that's, that was the passion for me. It was the building something that I'm really enjoying this. I want to do it. I believe in it. I'm proud of it. And it got to the point where that was not the case anymore, because it was just really, really hard. And there was a lot of, barriers. And financially, I'm not money motivated that I wanted to sell to get a big exit. But I also didn't want to work every day and get paid absolutely nothing.
Well, yeah, who does, right?
on the basis of
you still need to live.
Of a small potential somewhere in the future.
Right. Yeah. I mean, especially that many years in. I mean, I'd imagine at some point you're sort of looking at that thinking, well, I'm this many years in now and I'm not paying myself. Like this, it probably didn't feel like it was headed in the right direction from just that standpoint alone, right? But do you often... Sorry, go ahead.
So I was saying, from a personal perspective, not contributing to our family, income, that was quite important to me.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. Do you ever sort of look back at the sort of the days where you were just starting out and think, why didn't I just keep it like that? Like just, farmer's market, making a few quid, like making customers happy. Do you ever kind of sort of think about that?
No, because I would never have been happy with that. I don't think. No, I wanted to build some. I don't know why, but I'm proud that I built a retail brand. The farmers market was, hard, really hard. Getting up at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning, packing up food in your car, taking it there. I was fortunate that we had a big family, kind of 7-seater car. If we hadn't had that, I wouldn't have made it there. And then spending, half your Saturday not with your family. That was, all of it was really, impossibly, that was much harder part of the business. I belong behind a desk. I don't
Is that
belong,
your main takeaway from the journey? You've just concluded,
I think so. I don't belong in a warehouse. I mean, I can do it. I did it. I did it all, and I loved many parts of it. I just don't think that I'm at my best there, I suppose.
Right.
And it was so there are definitely things that I would have done differently.
Of course.
So I think, when we got the fundraising, I got carried away probably by, people talking about, how great paid media advertising was, just acquire customers and then, and then you'll keep them. And, so we spent a lot of money on these advertisements. And in hindsight, I wish that we'd not done as much. I wish we'd grown slower. So I wish we'd made the funds last longer, grown slower, because you can't rely on that next investment round. You cannot, there's no guarantee there. So, so we did, I think there's two ways you can go about it. You do what we did, which is spend loads of money, grow as quickly as you can, run out of money, and either hope that you're going to get the next investment round or you close. That's that's a really common pattern.
It is. It's what the startup ecosystem pretty much relies on, that pattern.
Yeah. I wish that I'd not been sucked into it a little bit as much. I wish that we needed that first investment round. A lot of people talk about just bootstrapping. I don't think we could have just bootstrapped because it's a capital intensive business. But I wish that when we got that first investment round that we had gone, right,
focus on profitability.
Let's absolutely focus on profitability. And if not, profitability from day one, understand exactly how and when you're going to get there, and look at those metrics on a really close basis. You can make assumptions. Our lifetime value is going to be £200 per customer, but if you're not achieving that each month, you have to readjust your valuations. You have to reset your benchmarks, your forecasts, your metrics. I probably didn't look forward enough, and the reason for that is because I think when you're a founder, one, you're sucked into everything. Two, you have to have an element of it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Because if you don't
have to be
that,
an optimist.
Yeah, you have to. Because if you don't have that, it's going to be okay. You kind of probably there's no point doing what you're doing at all.
Yeah.
Which is why now I want to be the person that's going to tell founders it's not going to be okay. Not tell them in that way, but the reality of, yeah, it could be okay, but it could also do this. Or
so
it could
let's
do
plan
this.
for
let's
X,
plan
Y, and Z.
and exactly and work out. And I think you can't. It's really hard for founders to do that for their own business.
But I think it means a lot coming from someone that's been there and done that compared to someone that hasn't. Like, there's so many fractionals that haven't built a business or attempted to, that are giving advice, and so many advisors and so many, that are giving advice these days. And it falls on deaf ears for good reason, because there's not really much backing it up other than hypothesis, which, look, in of itself doesn't mean it's invalid, but it can carry a lot more weight if you've been through the journey that you've been on, and you're saying, look, just from my experience, it's, yes, we're going to aim for here, but let's just plan for let's just make some contingencies in case things go wrong, because in my experience they can, right? So, and I think that just carries a lot more weight. On the subject of kind of lessons learned, I guess, aside from the one where you realize that you prefer sitting at desk. What are some others maybe that you've learned, like either personally or professionally, like some key takeaways that you've walked out of this with, if any? I mean, maybe, I don't know, but you mentioned in the post that you've had time to reflect and so on. So I'm assuming there might be some things that you've kind of.
I think the biggest one that I tell every single founder is ask for help. Ask for advice, ask for help, ask for people to make connections, because and just make sure that you do that, because you'll get so much from it. The other one I think is So the reason it took me, time to write the post is this, this element of shame, right? This, I've failed, I've not succeeded. I kind of was reflecting the other day, and there's been so many things in my life that I was kind of at the time deeply ashamed of. And it took me, a number of years to talk about it. So, for example, I got fired from KFC when I was 17 because and everybody gave away free food, and I never did it because I was so scared of giving away free food. I never did it. And then one day my best friend's little brother came in, and I was like, we called him Little Paul. It's Little Paul. Oh, I should give him something for free because, he's my best friend's little brother. And so I gave him gave it to him, and he went, no, I'm like, it's okay. And I'd never done it before. But I'm not a very good thief. I was so stupid because on the one day I did it, there was a temporary manager from another branch. And they watched me and they saw me do it, and they pulled me up and said, seen you do it, I'm going to go through a disciplinary. And I was so scared of going through this disciplinary that I quit the job. And, and I always told people, I know I left KFC. Yeah, I got a better job. I didn't want to be there anymore because, I was so ashamed of what I've done. And now I kind of, I'm still a bit ashamed because it's not me. I've never stolen anything in my life. It's not really me to do that. But, and it was basically, got dragged away with that. Everybody, you should just do it. We do it. You do it too. But it's only until years later where I could go, you know what? It's not the worst thing in the world that I did. I shouldn't be so ashamed of it. And as soon as you talk about it and you tell people and they do that, oh yeah, that's, you're not the worst person in the world. That shame sort of lifts and rises from you, and you can talk about it much more freely. And there's been, multiple different instances of, kind of failure that cause shame, that I have, kind of had. And so writing that post was an almost, and I need to do it because I need to show I'm okay with it. And I need to, kind of be open about it, because one of the things that really bothered me about the startup world is that, you hear so much about the successes. You just hear about, we've raised this, we've done this, we've launched here. And what you don't hear about is the ones that quietly fade into the background, close down, and you've no idea. During COVID, obviously, I followed a lot of startups, and then I'm like, oh, what happened to that one? And I go on the website, we're no longer trading. I'm like, well, how long's that been? Oh, I didn't know that had happened.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
And I didn't build fully in public, but I built a lot in public. I talked about my journey. I talked about the successes on LinkedIn. I felt like I owed it, if anybody was reading, I owed it to finish the story as well, to actually tell people, because it really pissed me off that people were not succeeding, but also not telling people they hadn't succeeded.
Yeah.
No closure, exactly. I hate movies that don't have a proper ending. I need to know what's the ending. None of this fade to black rubbish. And so, I thought I need to write my ending. And also, personally, it helped me because it meant that people weren't going to me, oh, what happened to your business? My poor mum, she went, how's your business going? I went, oh, it's closed. I don't want to talk about it. And she wrote me the most beautiful card, telling me, that she was really proud and that she understood if I didn't want to talk about it. And that was, kind of before the LinkedIn post, of course, when I wasn't really prepared to talk about it. So it took some time, but I felt really passionate about the fact that the story had to come full circle. It shouldn't just be left in the nether, for people not to know what had happened. Because people invested in me either by buying a product or actual investors, and they deserved that truth, that what had happened, and to help other entrepreneurs, to help other people to see the journey, and I got a lot of comments on the post. I also got an awful lot of direct messages from people saying, I've read your post, I'm going through the same thing, thank you, and I had a lot of calls with founders who who needed to hear that. So I didn't write the post for everybody, to thinking that I would get anything out of it, but I got a huge amount out of it, and a lot of support. And I think just like you said at the beginning, the amount of people that commented or were supportive on it, it just made me realize it's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay to. Interestingly, I sent the post to my dad. He read it about 4 weeks later, and he went, "I think you should take this down. You shouldn't talk about failing because whatever it is, people will think badly of you." I thought, "Oh, Dad, it's a bit late now."
Yeah.
But
so you know where you get it from.
Yeah.
That's what you've got two parents for, right? It's got to be
Absolutely.
the yin and yang. We've got to have it,
Yeah.
both of it. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I would say I totally understand, but I mean, I understand it in principle. I obviously don't. I mean, I understand that a lot of what you're saying about the shame. In principle, we all have that, right? Obviously, we all have things that we're shameful of in our lives, and I totally get that. Interestingly, as well, I believe the episode that would have come out before this one, the CEO of Unplugged, not Founders Unplugged, the show, but Unplugged, spoke a lot about shame. Actually, we talked about that in the episode, in the conversation, specifically about how he kind of turned his life around, and that's what led to then creating the business, was a lot to do with shame in his youth and his behavior, sort of just being a bit of bit of tearing up the town and sort of going out and, just, causing a nuisance, whatever. And he spoke a lot about that, and he talked a lot about how he started going to therapy and opening up, and how it's made a huge difference in his life about just talking about the things in which he is shameful of, and realizing that maybe they're not as big as he's kind of made out in his own mind, But when it comes to, I mean, it's weird. I almost hesitate to use the word, but when it comes to failure, right? It's incredible how we attach shame to failure, really, when you think about it. And even to the point where, like I say, I'm hesitant to even use the word, because I feel like I'm shaming you for putting this in. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm putting it into this thing, but it is what it is. Right?
It is.
It was an attempt to do something that didn't work, which by definition is a failure. But like, even that, the fact that we've got that association with the word failure in such a deep-rooted way into us, I think is problematic, because you do not get progress or growth without failure. Like, this is something that I teach my own son. I'm sure you teach your children too, and we should be. And even I struggle with it.
Yeah, I think there is no other word, right? That's the problem, is that
not succeeding.
It's the only word we've got. But
yeah,
it's what is it? If you haven't failed, you haven't tried.
Right.
And that's that's kind of, now I think failure is great. It different failures at different times, will take you, that time to recover from them, that time to learn from them, that time to realize, you have to go through a period of, of shame, of anger, of upset with your own failure, but eventually, you come out of it with some sort of, right, what happened there, and this is what I tell my kids all the time. I'm like, yeah, that was stupid of you. Why did you do that? You shouldn't have done it. But hang on, you're not going to go back and change it. You can't change what you've done. So don't beat yourself up about what you've done, because it's done. What are you going to do differently next time? How are you going to take that negative and turn it into a learning or a positive for the future?
Right. Yeah. But it's interesting because, even that, I guess, us saying to kids, like, don't beat yourself up about it. I mean, even to some extent, that's wrong. Like, because you also do need to a little bit. Like,
You're right.
Like, so even, the aspect of shame, it's like, we're criticizing it, but it's a very real and very needed biological response to failure, or to doing something wrong. Because, I mean, being shameless is awful, awful, the thing to be, like, to conduct yourself inappropriately and not feel like you've done anything wrong. So it's there for a very good reason, as well. But I guess the takeaway is just to not wallow in it, right?
Yeah,
that's
the
key.
it.
You've got to have the strength to pull yourself up out of it.
Yeah, it's the, oh, I'm so stupid, I'm an idiot. It's that voice in your head.
The self-talk, yeah.
The self, the way you wouldn't talk to anyone else, the way you talk to yourself.
I was about to say that.
Yeah. I have one memory. At the beginning of the business, I was using a chef to cook some of the product, and I needed to leave, and I left him to finish up the product, and he sent it out to customers. And I got, a couple of customers the next day saying, this is really bad, like, it's not very good. And so I went and I had one batch of what he had, and I tasted it. It was just awful. There's a lot of, a lot of the fish sauce, a lot of the salt flavoring brings all the flavors together. He just not added enough. And I was so angry because I'd left without tasting what went out the door. And I was, I had to resend it out to kind of I don't know, 30 customers, at my own cost, because I said, yeah, it's not good enough. I'll resend it out to you all. It cost us a huge amount of money to make it again, send it out, the shipping costs, everything. And I was just, I was fuming with myself. And I was like, oh, you're so stupid. You shouldn't have done that. You should have always tested it. Don't rely on somebody else. And I went for a walk, just outside, round our house with the dog. And I genuinely walked this walk, and I said to myself, I went, okay, right. So just because you fucked up doesn't make you a fuck up. And I had to tell myself that, to believe it. I had to, actually accept that I'd done something wrong. I'd made a mistake, but it was okay because it doesn't define me. It doesn't make me who I am by making mistakes. I just said, right, don't ever let that happen again, and learn from it. And so I'm so passionate about, learning from those failures and making sure that if you make them, yes, you can beat yourself up for a bit of time, but then just make sure, you don't happen again. Or sometimes you have to make the same mistake a few times before you learn from it, right? That is just life.
But
I'm fine with the word failure now, and I think that comes from a place of, realizing that if you don't try and you don't fail, you don't grow and you don't learn.
But I think the self-talk thing is a really important thing. Like, just to stop yourself at any point. I mean, this goes for anything, right? I don't think just being business owner. I think just being human. Like, we treat ourselves poorly, very, very poorly. I've told my wife on a number of occasions, like, the way that you talk, you would not speak to anyone the way that you speak to yourself, and you wouldn't let anyone talk to you the way that you speak to yourself. So it's like that. I think that's a really important thing to always try and keep in mind in general. And I try as hard as I can to go by that myself, which is, just if I catch myself, being overly critical, I mean, or just flat out rude or abusive to myself, it's like, I wouldn't let anyone talk to me like that. So why am I letting myself talk to me like that? Like, that's just totally unacceptable. Talk to me like I'm my own best friend. That's how I should be talking to myself, ideally. Just a sort of final point before I let you go as well. You mentioned about sort of the issue with the sort of the startup landscape, I guess, always sort of sharing what I call, positivity porn, right? And I actually posted something a couple of days ago from as of this recording, but it would have been a while ago once it's released, which is a video about how last week and the week before, I've been really struggling as a founder, and I was very open about it on a video I made. And it was primarily because of a promise I made at the beginning of the week with my content and on this show of trying to share more of the lows than just the highs, which I'm bad at both, to be honest. I'm just bad at sharing, remembering to create content as a whole. But specifically about just being a bit more honest. I mean, the whole point of this show is to do that. It's to open it up and to kind of, that's why it's longer form and just talk about, well, it's unplugged, right? That's the whole point. And it was incredible the amount of support I got for that. Just me saying, like, I'm struggling, like, I'm with motivation, like not with a business necessarily, but we're raising money, or we're trying to, and trying to get early adopters for pilots of the our service and product, and just all of it while also trying to pay the bills as a fractional, and then other things too that I threw in there, which is like I mentioned earlier, like I'm an insomniac that plays an incredibly horrific part in trying to find a routine and all that. And just the support was overwhelmingly positive, with a lot of people also just saying it's refreshing to kind of just see some honest stuff on LinkedIn, as opposed to all the finely polished sort of stuff, which there's a place for too, because it's, it's motivating and all that. But I think I agree with you. We just need more honesty. And I would say, keep doing what you're doing. I don't know if you've talked about it more since, but obviously you're recording this. This will come out. Would have this been the first sort of recorded conversation you've had on the topic, talking about the business?
I did do another podcast, more CFO focused one.
Okay.
To spoke a little bit about sort of the financial challenges of the business there. But I think that's it. It's just keep, if you keep talking, I think the problem with the positivity thing and the negativity is that they often don't give a balance, right? That's where, that's where people don't want somebody to be constantly negative. They don't want to be constantly positive. They want real and they want balance. So I think, when you kind of do both, it's really powerful because people say, oh, you're talking about something that you're struggling with, but hang on, last week you were talking about something absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, you don't want to just
There's
be
some
a downer
reality
as well.
there. Exactly.
Like every week me making a post like, oh, this is shit. I don't know why I'm doing this.
But it's that shame element again, right? Is it shameful to feel down or to feel, to failed and feel embarrassment? All of those things are so negatively viewed by ourselves. But actually, when you do it, people relate to it, right?
Yeah, and the interesting thing was, as I was recording, I almost did something wrong when I was recording it, in my view, which was as I was wrapping up my thoughts, I started going like, and I know what I should be doing, to get out of this, and I should be doing this, should be doing that. And so I started rattling off the things. I was like, I know what I need to be doing. Like, so, basically to say like, don't comment, like, I know what I need to be doing. And I was about to be like, but I'm going to set myself, and I was going to try and end it on like this positive note, because I was feeling like I'm trauma dumping, like who's going to be, who's going to want it. And I was like, and I stopped myself from doing that. I said, but you know what? I'm okay just being a bit down. I kind of had to sort of say to myself, like, to bring it into existence, but also to kind of be, affirm myself, like, it's okay just to be not okay sometimes. And that's where I am right now. There's not necessarily a happy ending, unfortunately, with every small story that we go through in life and as entrepreneurs. It's like this particular story for this day, I'm going to go to bed a bit sad. I'm going to go to bed a bit overly tired, a bit overly stressed and anxious. There's always tomorrow. But for right now, that's where the story is ending. Like, and that's reality. I'm not going to try and put a spin on it and say, but I'm really excited about what's coming tomorrow and what we're going to be doing. No. It's like, that isn't always the case. Some days you do go to bed sad,
because you can't be excited for tomorrow when you're feeling that way.
Exactly.
Right? And I think,
that's real.
Yeah.
And I think that's why people message me like, that resonates with me more than if I tried to do that. I think people would have gone like, that felt a bit fake, dude. Like, I think that's probably would have been, because that wasn't how I felt.
No. I think that's what I try and do now is, if I have those moments and days of feeling like that, which are very cyclical for me.
For all of us, yeah.
It's knowing, like, it's okay. It's okay to feel like this today, because you don't feel like this all the time, and if you do, then you definitely need to get more help. But, it's okay to feel, different emotions on different days and, like you say, not be okay. Or sometimes, be totally okay, really enjoy it. But it's kind of letting them happen, letting those, those waves, happen to you and not trying to control them too much. Because then I think that's where it starts to become, much more difficult. Like you say, not going, but everything will be fine because of this. That's, you're kind of almost kidding yourself there, right? And you not allowing yourself to have those feelings, those emotions. And that's where social media kind of does portray a very different view of the world than is reality, when it just shows positive things all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just talk to yourself nicely throughout. Like as best as you can.
Yes,
I think that's key.
Be kind.
Be kind to yourself. Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I'm going to let you go. You've been incredibly gracious and generous with your time. I really can't tell you how appreciative I am of it. And for opening up and telling me and telling whoever's listening and watching about this. Please continue to do so. I honestly think it's really, it's great. It's important. People need to hear. And we'll, like you've seen already, I've shown an interest and people have shown an interest, but also found it incredibly, useful and I'm trying to think of other synonyms, but you know what I'm saying.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to be eloquent for no reason, really. But I really appreciate your time. So thank you so much for joining me. And I'll put your LinkedIn and everything below. Is there anyone else who want to shout out or direct people to while I'm putting stuff in the description?
No, that's fine. No.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again so much. I really appreciate it. And hope you've enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. And we'll stay in touch, I'm sure. And if anyone needs a CFO, fractional CFO,
please do.
Brilliant. All right, well, take care, and hopefully we'll speak again very soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening and/or watching. Please like and subscribe, or if you are listening via podcasting service and want to show your support, consider rating or leaving a review. It really helps. See you next week.